Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and today we've got spy shots again, but this time of what looks like a pretty significant update to both of Triumph's Speed Twin models, so the 900 and the 1200. And to me these updates really do look quite interesting, with a lot of changes that I think the customers have genuinely been asking for. So in this video we'll go through all of the details with everything that we can pick out from these pics. Now let's start with the Speed Twin 900, and this is a bike that started life back in 2015, and it was originally, when it was launched, known as the Street Twin. It's basically a slightly more modern twist on the Bonneville platform, but with a lot of the same underpinnings as a bike like the T100. I actually owned this bike when it was the Street Twin, the first gen. Absolutely loved it. I thought it was a brilliant retro commuter, really good looking, lots of torque, bags of fun to ride, especially sort of carving through traffic. Now, a few years later, in 2019, Triumph actually announced the Speed Twin, and this is a much more sporty version with the 1200 engine and a more serious chassis spec. Then, in 2022, I think to streamline the naming conventions, because the modern classics lineup was, and still is, really quite big, they renamed them, so the Street Twin became the Speed Twin 900, and the Speed Twin became the Speed Twin 1200. Thing is though, in making this change, well, it was just the name. They didn't make any technical changes to the Street Twin, and so I think some people felt like it wasn't necessarily worthy of the Speed Twin 900 name. So perhaps some of you will be glad to see that in these spy shots, they do seem to have moved that bike significantly towards that more performance-biased direction. Now, first up, we've got the suspension, which used to be pretty simple with a fairly basic right way up fork and simple twin shocks. But this bike is on what looks like significantly upgraded suspension, so you've got an upside down fork at the front from Marzocchi, and twin shocks at the rear also from Marzocchi, and these get piggyback reservoirs. Now, I still wouldn't expect a great deal of adjustability for this model. It isn't meant to be that sort of level of rider that it's targeted at, but you will of course get the obligatory preload on the shocks, and still an upside down fork should perform better than the right way up fork because the heavier bits at the top, so there's less unsprung weight, so the fork can more easily do its job. And yeah, the standard shocks on the current generation are really quite basic, so I'd imagine that these are going to be a bit of a step up. Now you can also see you've got a radially mounted 4-piston brake caliper up front there. It's still on a single disc, but generally radial calipers are more rigid, there's less deflection than axial calipers, and so I'd expect this to be a little crisper than even the Brembo branded caliper on the current bike, which is actually mounted. It also looks like it will carry Triumph branding on this caliper, which is something we're seeing more and more of on their bikes recently, like the Daytona 660 for example. But ultimately they'll be made by, I guess, J-Juan, who make brakes for many people, pretty much everyone. I guess realistically this allows Triumph to spec them exactly as they want, but also potentially save a bit and not having the big fancy name on the calipers. Now you've still got an 18-inch wheel up front on this bike, which does give it a bit of that old school appearance. Naturally, being a bit bigger as well, it's not going to feel quite so sporty as the 17-incher, for example, on the 1200 Speed Twin, but it does look like you get a new spoke pattern here, and so maybe they've been able to shed a bit of weight. And lighter wheels can have a dramatic effect on the handling of the bike because they're both rotating mass and unsprung mass. The only major downside, I suppose, of that 18-inch front is it does mean you're a little bit limited in terms of choice of tyres, especially when it comes to the more sporty stuff. But I guess changing the wheel size means you probably have to change the frame as well, because it's going to affect the geometry, and so that might be why they decided not to do that. Now, from a tech perspective, the current gen bike gets a really simple analog speeder, and then you've got a little LCD insert that just gives you a little bit more riding information, but fairly basic stuff. But it looks like this one, the one that's been spied out testing, gets that part inverted LCD display and part TFT, which you'll see on a lot of their bikes at the moment, like the Street Triple R, the new Scrambler 1200X, and of course the 660 lineup, so the Trident, the Daytona, and the Tiger Sport. This opens up a whole bunch more features like riding modes and menus and phone connectivity for handling calls, media, and turn-by-turn nav through the My Triumph app. I'd say probably generally not that bothered about techie features on what is meant to be a fairly simple retro like the Speedtwin 900. But then again, this is the way that the whole motorcycle market is going. You're getting more and more features on more and more bikes at different price points, and even with the slightly more old school aesthetic. And I will say, some of the key competitors for this bike, like the Ducati Scrambler Icon, have recently been updated with a TFT dash, riding modes, and that sort of thing. So I do understand that Triumph have to keep this bike competitive in terms of features. Now, what's also interesting is we can see a bit of a styling tweak here to bring it more in line with the visual style of the Speedtwin 1200, and I think it does make for a slightly better looking bike that's a little bit more modern as well. There's the new headlight with the daytime running lights set into it, which does have a more premium feel than the standard bulb headlight that you get on the current bike. Also, you've got these more modern looking standard issue Triumph LED indicators. I like the look of those as well. And then at the rear, the lighting's changed quite a lot with something a bit sleeker that looks a lot more similar to the 1200. I think there's also a slightly different shape to the tank here. I think it's a little more angular. The foot pegs look to be a bit thinner and more sporty. And then also the saddle, I think it's a bit flatter, much more in line with the one you'll see on the 1200. And so it all adds up for a bike that I think looks a little more up to date, but also the quality of the finish, the design of some of those pieces elevates this bike a little bit beyond the current model. The only thing I will say that looks a bit ugly here is the emission sensors on the exhaust headers. I hope these are purely for testing purposes. They absolutely must be, because I can't think that Triumph would ever just leave them there, given how much attention to detail they put into the rest of the bike. I will say though, there are two things that I think make this bike really appealing for a lot of riders. One of them is the fact that it's the most affordable Bonneville-powered bike that you can currently buy. It comes in at £8,795. And the other is the seat height, which is really quite low at 765 millimeters. So if you're a newer rider, a shorter rider, or if you're commuting and want to get your feet down when you're threading through traffic, or if you just like that chilled out riding position, then that's quite a lot lower than a lot of bikes, even in their lineup, but also from competitors. And so it could be considered quite a strong selling point. Now, almost certainly the price is going to go up quite a bit with all this technology and extra spec in terms of the chassis. And as for the seat height, well, like I say, the seat does look flatter. It doesn't stoop down so much. And a slight lift would also suit the more sporting character that they're trying to give the bike. You do feel a little bit sat back on the current bike, and so it's not a riding position you'd typically associate with going fast. So look, what I think would be really great with this update is if they kept something similar to the current Speedtwin 900 with the lowish price, the fairly basic spec, the simple technology, and that very accessible riding position, but then also offer this bike for anyone who wants something a touch more punchy and maybe label it an RS version or something like that. As always though, I'd love to know what you think, so let me know down in the comments below which one would you go for given the choice. On to the main course though, the Speedtwin 1200, a brilliant retro bike, one of my favourite bikes to ride to be honest. And this one also came originally with a fairly basic spec, so pretty simple brakes, a right way up fork, until they updated it a couple of years later with Brembo M50 brakes I think, and a Marzocchi upside down fork. But in the comments of the videos that we've made about this bike, we've made plenty as well, I always see this recurring theme, which is that people wanted effectively a full-on RS version to really take full advantage of the way that this bike can ride. It's a brilliant engine, plenty of torque, a really good chassis as well, and one of the only things that really does let it down is the budget twin shocks at the rear. Thing is though, I always got the feeling that Triumph didn't want to spec this bike too good in case it started to step on the toes of their flagship sporty Bonneville, the Thruxton RS. But this year, they announced the final edition of the Thruxton. They're going to be winding it up. I guess it wasn't selling particularly well, and so this limited run, the Thruxton FE, celebrates effectively the end of the line. Now, sad news if you like a cafe racer, but the upside is it does clear a path for an even more sporty Speedtwin 1200, which of course with the flat handlebars is going to be much more comfortable for the majority of riders than the clip-on style bars of the Thruxton. So if it can do a similar job but more comfortable, then I think they'll be onto a winner. Now, a lot of the spec on this test bike, which is in the spy shots, does look pretty similar to the current bike. So you've got the 17-inch wheels front and rear, the Marzocchi upside down fork up front, the sporty Brembo monoblock brakes, but at the rear you can indeed now see fully adjustable Öhlins piggyback shocks, which should give you that massive step up in ride quality at the rear, and also means this bike would totally warrant the Speedtwin 1200 RS name, should it exist. Now you've also got some similar styling tweaks here to the 900, so that new headlight, I think it is a different tank shape as well with slightly more modern lines, and also on this one it's a bit scalloped out here to make room for the fork, much like the Scrambler 1200s. Then you've also got the twin clocks being replaced by that hybrid dash that we also saw on the 900. And so look, while the update to the 900 is the more substantial, I would say, there are still some really nice tweaks here to the 1200 that should improve the tech a lot, slightly enhance the styling as well, and also improve the handling with those lovely looking rear shocks. Primarily though, I'm really interested to see how much of a change it's made to the 900. I really want to find out how that rides, hoping that something very similar to this does eventually hit the market. And in the meantime, I'd love to know from you what you make of these two new bikes. Down in the comments below, is this the Speedtwin 1200 that people have been asking for? And would it make it pretty much one of the best retro bikes on the market? Now, I will admit, I have ridden something pretty similar. Jack Lilly, a Triumph dealer in London, let me ride one of their custom specials, which took the Öhlins fork and Öhlins shocks from a Thruxton to make what they say was their approximation of a Speedtwin RS. So if you want to know what I thought of it, if you haven't seen it already, I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Quite an old video, that one, so it's probably a bit different in presentation and filming and editing style, but still a very interesting bike, so worth a watch. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.